Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And I'm kind of doing a follow-up to yesterday's video about the Labour white paper on immigration, in which they had a lot of good and basic ideas, but obviously it's nowhere near the level it needs to be. And there was a Starmer speech that I frankly glossed over because I find his speech is frightfully boring, but really it was more a watershed moment than I think I was letting on. This is a complete vibe shift, but we have seen so many over the past few months, it's kind of hard to get your head round, oh wait, there is actually another one. This is going further than it actually was before, and I'm only just noticing. But before we get properly into that, I think it's worth covering the fact that Keir Starmer's front door appears to have been attacked by an arsonist. A potential firebomb, according to the Mail Online. It looks deliberate. From what I can tell, a 21-year-old man has been arrested in connection to this attack. We don't know too much about the motivations at the moment. This could literally be a far leftist, far rightist, or possibly even a sectarian for the whole Gaza thing, but we don't know at the moment. 21-year-old in London? Well, I think it's less likely to be a far righty, I'll put it that way. The suspect has been held on suspicion of arson with intent to endanger life in relation to 3 separate fires, so this is a serial arsonist as well. So it's actually completely reasonable to suspect it might just be a completely random attack. He just happened to firebomb Starmer's house. I'm not completely on that line of thinking, but this is also crazy that it literally could just be a random attack. Anyway, we'll see if it's a terrorist and what type of terrorist it is, because if it's a far lefty, well, the left are once again going to have to answer the question, why do you keep saying that the far left don't exist, and why do you keep claiming they're not violent? Anyway, it's time to get into a couple of particular parts of the speech that, frankly, due to lack of a better term, let's just pretend it's 2015, it's triggered the left. But ironically, they're triggered again. They don't stop being triggered. It's just these days, it's seen as almost anachronistic to see left-wingers do nothing but whinge and moan. I guess it's because they're now whinging about their own side. But this just feels all really old. It's actually my standard reply to a lot of these complaints of saying, listen, it's not 2015 anymore, you actually have to come up with arguments. But we'll get into what I mean. So here is a section of Keir Starmer's speech.
Today we publish a white paper on immigration, a strategy absolutely central to my plan for change that will finally take back control of our borders.
I mean, seriously, look, pretend it's 2015 again. This is all very vote leave, UKIP, generally just one of the main arguments for the whole Brexit campaign. Take back control. What does that mean? Well, for a start, take back control of the borders. We want to know who's coming in and out. And obviously the implication here, as Keir Starmer keeps going on about, is that the Tories had absolutely no control. Now, obviously, the obvious bite back, and the Tories have been doing this on Twitter, is to say, hang on, every time we did something stupid with the border, you said, actually, you need to go stupider. But kind of regardless of all that, this is the leader of the mainstream left-wing party, effectively saying the same thing Nigel Farage has been saying for literally decades. I'm talking 3 decades, at the very least. And we've got to a vibe shift where basically every single major party is having an arms race to try and outflank that to the right. None of them are succeeding, despite what the eternal loser right will tell you, and trust me, I will be doing a big stream on that tonight, so do come along to watch that. Farage is still very much to the right of an awful lot of this, because as I went through yesterday, there's no stopping illegal immigration. It's got worse under Labour. Okay, this white paper might largely help, but really the results are yet to be seen. When it comes to reform, they are the only party who actually have an annual cap, when net zero immigration is the very top limit of what they want. So it's great to see this vibe shift. It's great to see effectively everything now have to be on the side of who can have the least immigration. But unfortunately, the 2 major parties, or historically major parties, are still giving the game away. But I went through most of that yesterday.
Between 2019 and 2023, net migration quadrupled until in 2023 it reached nearly 1 million. That's about the population of Birmingham, our 2nd largest city.
Again, if you switched on GB News pretty much at any time, but especially in the evening, this statistic was pretty much always brought up. GB News has officially become the news channel that is almost dictating the terms of politics now. That is a ridiculous vibe shift. And by the way, at this point in time, GB News is effectively either Reform's broadcaster or at least the right-wing Tories broadcaster. It's a bit of both. And Labour have been forced to shift on that, again with one of the biggest majorities we've seen in British politics, and it's all because they know it's on fragile stilts. It's because of all these statistics about their vote share. And of course, we just had the local elections, which is effectively making them panic like this.
That's not control, it's chaos. A one-nation experiment in open borders.
Again, just incredible rhetoric, pretty much pinched straight from Nigel Farage, and also among other Reform MPs, and of course the ex-Reform MP. And it's why it looks so, well, fake. This looks incredibly inauthentic. Why? Well, because Keir Starmer has constantly been saying, oh, we don't want to fall into this politics. He was saying that for years, and now he's fallen into the politics because he has literally no choice.
Today, this government is shutting down the lab. The experiment is over. We will deliver what you've asked for time and again, and we will take back control of our borders.
Jolly good, jolly good, jolly good, jolly good. The left-wing pro-migration push, effectively, if you're on that side of politics now, you go to the Greens. Maybe Lib Dems as well, if Greens are a bit too pro-weed for you. And obviously, the left had some reaction to this part of the speech, but really, the one that was the nail in the coffin for any sort of left-winger who voted for Keir Starmer to be pro-migration, that was effectively all destroyed with this particular line.
These rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together.
So I mentioned this yesterday, but it's definitely worth going through again. This is effectively paraphrasing what Enoch Powell said in his Birmingham speech, or Rivers of Blood speech, if you really want to call it that. But while the immigrant entry to this country was admission to privileges and opportunities eagerly sought, the impact upon the existing population was very different. For reasons which they could not comprehend, and in pursuance of a decision by default on which they were never consulted, they found themselves made strangers in their own country. They found their wives unable to obtain hospital beds in childbirth, their children unable to obtain school places, their homes and neighbourhoods changed beyond recognition, their plans and prospects for the future defeated. At work, they found that employers hesitated to apply the immigrant worker the standards of discipline and competence required of native-born workers. They began to hear, as time went by, more and more voices which told them that they were now the unwanted. They now learn that a one-way privilege is to be established by Act of Parliament, a law which cannot, and is not intended to, operate to protect them or redress their grievances, is to be enacted to give the stranger, the disgruntled, and the agent provocateur the power to pillory them for their private actions. Now, at the time, Enoch Powell was talking about the Race Relations Act, which is effectively, if you want to put it this way, it was the first act in a string of acts that instituted, effectively, race communism into British law. And that led all the way up to all these laws being put together in the Equality Act. And it's just horrible. It's led to businesses not being able to pay wages in the way they should, with the whole next issue with the warehouse workers being paid more than the shop workers, despite the fact, this might have been Asda actually, despite the fact that they actually had a scheme saying if you want the warehouse wages, we can do a scheme where you work part-time in the shop, part-time in the warehouse. And I think one person actually stayed on for it. I think they had 70 people show interest. Basically, none of them wanted to do it, at least after a few weeks. And it just goes to show, maybe there's a reason they get paid more, but they took them to court instead, using the Equality Act. Now, obviously, originally it was specifically about race with the Race Relations Act, but, you know, you've got sexual orientation, gender put in there as well, religion as well. I guess that's kind of with the whole immigration thing, and it's got ridiculous. Literally ridiculous, but these two paragraphs, effectively, are what are being paraphrased, or at least the arguments underlying these paragraphs are effectively what Keir Starmer has said here. Labour, modern Labour I should say, woke Labour if you want to put it that way. You know, Sir Keir Starmer, the man who but a year ago was effectively saying trans women are women, things like that, now aping Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. Yeah, there's been a real vibe shift, and This is what has caused a lot of issues with a lot of people. As mentioned before, the only real pro-immigration party at this point now is the Green Party, with Zach Polanski, who's likely to be the new Green leader by the autumn, decided to post this out. Starmer's Britain and it's not even subtle anymore. And it's a line from Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. They found themselves made strangers in their own country, and Keir Starmer saying, "We risk becoming an island of strangers." Yeah, well, he certainly touched upon something that clearly has been an issue for coming up to 60 years. Literally 60 years people have been complaining about this. 60 years people have wanted less immigration. And you've got to bear in mind that that's even over a period in the 80s where we had net emigration. The pure numbers are a massive issue, and this is why they've had to move to the net number, because it looks way, way better. Unfortunately, you then had Boris Johnson come in, create the Boris wave, and then net immigration was something like 1 million. And what I love most about this is, the other day I did a video covering Zach Polanski on a Politics Joe podcast, and I said, Zach Polanski, he seems to just want Green Party policy to be completely unchanged but have a bigger megaphone and be a bit meaner to right-wingers. And I had people say, what's my evidence that Zach Polanski's pro-immigration? And it's like, just look at how the Greens act, look at Green policy, and then find me anywhere where Zach has actually said, I want to change these particular parts of Green policy. But he didn't. He said he wants it, and now we've got this particular tweet. There we go. It's proven. Zach Polanski and the Green Party, that is your pro-immigration party. Expect them to make gains against Labour, by the way. That's definitely going to happen. They are the left-wing party now. Unless, of course, the Liberal Democrats can, look serious again. Greens organise a particularly left-wing group in the Green Party. As I said, Keir Starmer can quote Enoch Powell all he wants. He didn't actually quote Enoch Powell. He paraphrased him. Intentionally or not, I don't really know or care. We know that immigration is what makes Great Britain great. Let's celebrate it, not blame it. Oh my god, let's take a look at this video.
We see the numbers of net migration, and we're like, this is a lot.
Oh, well, that's it. Argument over then.
But then if you actually went down to the nitty-gritty of that and tried to break it down, how many of those numbers are international students who are bringing in thousands into this country?
Well, I mean, if you're only going to number of student visas, it's quite a lot. The problem you have is that a lot of people come over on student visas and then get lost in the system, either overstay their welcome or effectively got into the university, and sometimes it's based on a false promise, by the way. Sometimes the incentive is to get so many students in just to take the money, and then effectively tell them, you'll go there, have accommodation provided for you for 3 years, and then have an easy job after that. And that's not true. I've been to university. You have to do quite a lot yourself to get your living arrangement sorted, for instance. And some, through no fault of their own, can either end up homeless, or some do come over with nefarious reasons to come over and effectively get lost in the system of effectively them being an illegal immigrant and then try and claim asylum or effectively join criminal gangs. We've seen evidence and cases of that all the time. But not only that, students can also bring over dependents, which would then be a net drain on Britain, because dependents don't necessarily have to work. Now, I know in theory they can't claim benefits, but that's why a lot come over and then claim asylum, so then they can. So yeah, you can look into the numbers all you want, but you then actually go a step further and look into the numbers even more. Yeah, it's not actually that beneficial to have migration. If it was, you'd see GDP per capita skyrocket, but it's basically flatlined, especially since the Boris wave, but also since basically 2008. We haven't grown as a country for pretty much coming up to 20 years. It's close to 17, but we've not grown as a country for a while, and we're really noticing.
How many of those numbers are care workers who are taking care of our sick and are disabled?
I think the statistic is something like 1 in 5 care workers is a foreign worker, so not that many.
What is the actual value of a migrant?
Depends on the migrant. High-skilled ones, yeah, quite valuable. Low-skilled ones, net cost. This research has been done. I mean, I may as well show the graph. This was a study done in Denmark, and this is a trend that we tend to see across pretty much all European countries, probably in America too. But the net contribution to the country, pretty much for everyone, is between the ages of about 27 to about 75, something like that. And effectively, as you can see, the Danish and Westerners, so that would be America and Europe, tend to be net contributors for this time. You then go to non-Western countries, you're talking China, India, places like that, you tend to have a fiscal benefit, again, between the ages of about 27, but this drops to about 60. So, not too much for a net cost. However, the type of immigrants that we've had, so that's MENAPT countries, these are effectively third world or poor countries, they never make a net fiscal contribution, ever. And this is where we have had most of our immigration. Literally, they are always a net cost. And so, yeah, when you dig into the numbers, you don't get good results as much as you would try and claim. Now, this doesn't mean don't take anyone ever from MENAPT countries. This does mean you need to be very selective and make sure that it is only highly skilled people, or maybe, as you're phasing back in training our own doctors properly again, you phase out that immigration. We can end probably 90% of immigration overnight, and it wouldn't make much of a difference. In fact, it would probably improve things, oddly enough. So trying to say, oh, you actually look in statistics, it's all good, well, I did that for you, and it's not true.
What is the actual value of a real person who is not just a number?
Well, hang on, that's the right-wing argument. Our point is, hang on, let's look at this case by case and see, oh, are they going to be an economic boon or not? High-skilled workers, yeah, perfectly reasonable. They'll be useful. Universities, fine having international lecturers, assuming they can actually speak English. I had a lecturer who could barely speak English. Basically, everyone failed that module. Actually, the person who did best in that module was a guy who went to none of the lectures. It was incredible. A British nationals married this person from, I don't know, Japan or something. Yep, they're fine, they're good, they'll make one of us very happy. Perfectly reasonable. But it's impossible to do a case-by-case basis with 1 million people in a year. It's just not going to happen, and it's not happening. So let's not pretend we're vetting these people. And you don't even want them vetted anyway, so come on.
They're not illegal, they're legal. If we haven't got the nurses, the doctors, the carers and all the others to do the job they do, like they did for my mum and like they were with my husband when he was ill, I mean, what would we do?
I mean, the funny thing is that people, when it comes to hospitals, people don't tend to mind the immigration as much as, say, hand car washes. That is definitely true. The problem is that due to, frankly, public sector unions, they have limited the amount of training of nurses and doctors we can actually do, and it's forced us into this situation. This is why with reducing immigration in these sectors, it's going to have to be phased out, because you can't train nurses and doctors overnight. In fact, one massive change that will probably help is allowing apprenticeship nurses. I don't see why you have to go to university and do a degree to be a nurse. That was never a standard in the past. And since nurses did have to go to university, well, it's not massively improved healthcare here, has it? So what's the point?
How much of all these services depend on foreign workers?
99%.
99%?
Yes.
That's an astonishing number.
It is. We have tried local recruitment, but it's not, we've failed in many cases.
For local services in, say, London, yeah, this is probably true. But again, these are all issues that, effectively, the market will kind of fix itself. You start phasing in more training of British doctors and nurses, all of a sudden you have less reliance on immigrant workers doing that. But again, this takes years to get into place properly, and frankly, I don't see Labour particularly doing that. I certainly don't see them taking on the unions, and that's what you have to do to get into that situation. So God knows how they're going to square the circle if they actually reduce these care and health workers. Because the only way I can see that realistically happening is effectively if you, well, for lack of a better term, mass deport people so that the demand is putting less pressure on these services. But there we go.
Giving up their families to come here and look after our vulnerable people. And if there's a risk that that may be, reduced or come to an end, then the effects broadly for society would be quite catastrophic, and it would be very blinkered not to appreciate that.
I think what would largely happen instead is, effectively, people would have to bring in their elderly parents into their home and look after them themselves to some degree. That wasn't particularly unusual in the past. And yeah, maybe a care home would make more sense. But the problem is, if you put yourselves in a position where you are reliant on bringing people over that nobody really wants, then, well, yeah, you have to square this circle somehow.
So long as you're an immigrant, there's no appreciation whatsoever. There's always backlash.
Well, to be honest, it depends how good you are at your job. Obviously, I think everyone's had experience with both a British national and a foreign health worker to some degree. And as far as I can tell, everyone who's been treated by both treats both effectively the same. If your healthcare's bad, yeah, there's no appreciation. If your healthcare's good, there's appreciation. That's what I can tell. You know, both my grandmothers were in a care home where probably about, I don't know, 1 in 3 people was a foreign care worker. Despite them being old boomers, they still showed the same appreciation for both. They weren't boomers, sorry, they were silent generation. But either way, if your healthcare service is reliant on, you know, 1 in 5 people being a foreign worker, you've probably gone wrong somewhere. And obviously there needs to be the appreciation that, especially when it comes to hospitals, it's less so the case in healthcare. Sorry, elderly care. There's an awful lot of demand pushed on by immigrants as well as the native population, so, you know, that would kind of sort itself. But anyway, the political editor for BBC Newsnight had, he had this to say on Newsnight.
Nick, what reaction are you picking up to
Well, Vic, it's interesting that you said to Jackie Smith there, you raised the concerns amongst some in the Labour Party that the Prime Minister was echoing the language of Enoch Powell in his notorious Rivers of Blood speech in 1968.
Yes, this is particularly a worry of the left wing at the moment. It turns out that a man that they have called racist for some time is now effectively dictating policy to the two historically major parties and the major insurgent one. Greens planted their flag in the pro-migration side and, well, they'll probably see a bit of growth, but I still think they're going to be in 4th place. And I don't mean behind the Tories, I mean behind the Lib Dems. Who, to be fair, I've not seen too much of the Lib Dems causing a fuss about this. I think they're trying to largely keep quiet on it.
And it's interesting, I caught up a few hours ago with Nigel Farage and, you know, it's not rocket science that some of that speech was aimed at answering the threat from Reform UK in the local elections. And Nigel Farage thinks it was a big mistake, he says, for the Prime Minister to echo the language of Enoch Powell. He talks about how it was a strategic mistake, and he told me the use of that language was not in Keir Starmer's interest. It's a catastrophic mistake that will divide the left for years to come.
Yeah, Nigel Farage is just correct there, by the way. This entire video is about how this has created a division in the left, with Labour loyalists, I guess, saying, oh, we actually have to do something about immigration. Let's pretend there was nothing wrong with the speech. And obviously people who've been thinking about going over to Greens saying, well, that was racist. Let's move. And it's also a massive mistake because I don't think anybody trusts that Keir Starmer's actually going to do anything particularly radical with immigration. Just the basic stuff of, oh, I'll do the stuff that caused Boris Wave, take it out and throw it away. So you still end up with, you know, pre-Boris Wave levels of immigration, which was still something like 300,000 a year. It's still remarkably high. Again, I keep hearing things like, oh, Starmer's outflanking Reform and Farage from the right. No, he's not. He's not even setting a cap. If he did set a cap, it would be in the hundreds of thousands. It's nothing. Absolutely nothing compared to the net zero immigration, which I kept hearing as well, oh, that's still really too high from dork right types. And now apparently, according to them, Keir Starmer's frankly lacklustre immigration reform, which effectively take me back to 2015, is apparently good enough to say they're to the right of reform. Honestly, anyway, I should save that for tonight because I have a lot to say on that topic. Let's continue with the left.
So what was Starmer saying? What was Powell saying? So the Prime Minister was saying, I welcome immigration, but we need fair rules. And he says in that clip that you played at the top, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate this, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. Similar language, different context from Enoch Powell. He was talking about how immigrants coming to this country have enjoyed privileges and opportunities different to the experience of the existing population. And then he said this, for reasons which they could not comprehend and in pursuance of a decision by default on which they were never consulted, they found themselves made strangers in their own country.
I mean, it is very funny that just before he talked about the island of strangers, Starmer said, I welcome diversity. Still trying to flaunt his woke credentials, I guess, but at the same time, it's just never going to be enough. He joined a purity spiral and is, I don't know, is he expecting people to not still be on a purity spiral train? Why would they stop it? It's also quite funny how he frames it as, oh, Keir Starmer is completely welcoming to immigrants, he just wants it lower. And then tries to say, effectively imply that Enoch Powell's a racist. But that would obviously be ignoring this paragraph. Now, at all times where there are marked physical differences, especially of colour, integration is difficult, though over a period not impossible. There are among the Commonwealth immigrants who have come to live here in the last 15 years or so, many thousands whose wish and purpose is to be integrated and whose every thought and endeavour is bent in that direction. In other words, again, this is why I always say this speech is actually civic nationalist. It's not too far away, actually, from what Keir Starmer is saying, though Enoch Powell isn't saying he celebrates the diversity. He is clearly on the side of, you don't need to kick them all out. There are good ones here. But obviously the numbers that Enoch Powell would pick out and the numbers that Keir Starmer would pick out would be vastly different. Starmer's numbers would be in the millions. I imagine Enoch Powell's possibly in the hundreds of thousands at this point. About where I am, you know? It's also no secret to anybody who knows Powell that he spoke Urdu to his Indian constituents, was friends with plenty of people from different nations, and as pointed out in his speech, was obviously on the side of, yes, obviously integration is possible. So any sort of insinuation I ever see that Powell's a racist, I just always have to address it. I really hate that that's become his legacy. He's nowhere near what both the far left and far right want him to be. He was just a normal guy, just with a very, very high-functioning brain on pretty much every level apart from the level of, well, social cues and things like that. I'm sure you catch my drift there. Anyway, let's let the BBC finish off.
So Keir Starmer was saying it's about rules. Enoch Powell was saying it's the implication of having migrants to this country.
No. Enoch Powell's going on about rules too. A large part of his speech was about the Race Relations Act. In fact, you go through the speech, he's going on about 3 pieces of Tory policy. One is obviously get rid of the Race Relations Act. And the other 2 pieces were, well, stop immigration inflow as it is now because, well, the public want it stopped. And then the other side is, well, people who want to leave, we should probably help to leave and, in fact, cut the pull factors that are making people want to move here because, well, then maybe they'd actually go back to where they want to go but can't necessarily afford, or they just get too many privileges here, as he said, with things like the Race Relations Act, etc, etc. So Enoch Powell's speech was actually about rules too. It's more similar than you think, but obviously the whole zeitgeist around Enoch Powell is, oh, he was just a racist who hates immigrants, but I've been through how that's nonsense. Anyway, finish off.
Obviously important to say that Nigel Farage very much in his interest to drive a wedge between Labour and the parties to its left.
Well, I don't think Nigel Farage really needs to do anything about that, to be honest. I think Keir Starmer's doing that perfectly well himself. As is, well, evidenced by his own MPs. Zara Sultana, the Prime Minister imitating Powell's Rivers of Blood speech is sickening. That speech fueled decades of racism and division. Oh, again, I don't know how much evidence there necessarily is for that. Mostly from what I've seen, it's anecdotes, and I'm sure those anecdotes are true, I've no doubt about that. But again, it's just the implication that Powell wanted race riots and Powell was a racist. Both are completely untrue. He was trying to actually stop future violence. Echoing today is a disgrace and it adds to the anti-migrant rhetoric that puts lives at risk. Shame on you, Keir Starmer. Yeah, again, this is again reform having to do nothing and winning. The clip's boring, by the way. It's just once again the islands of strangers and strangers of their own country lines put together. Who cares? Anyway, Politics Joe decided to interview Nadia Witome, who seems to be the only MP who's managed to get PTSD from working as an MP. I guess let's take a quick look at the video.
To be completely frank, my initial gut reaction was one of disgust. We're never going to out-reform reform. I come at this from the perspective, the radical perspective, that migrants, people seeking asylum, refugees are human beings who have a right to live and work and build a life.
Yeah, that's enough of that. I've heard these arguments so many times, I just don't even care anymore. And this wasn't just limited, obviously, to left-wingers in politics. Even left-wing outlets were claiming that Keir Starmer's the new Enoch Powell, which just obviously isn't true. Even Reform's policies aren't quite that of Enoch Powell's, but it's certainly the most realistic policy that we could probably expect in the modern world. You've got to realise as well, Enoch Powell's period of time had a completely different political landscape when it came to immigration. To a lot of people, tens of thousands gross was way too much, but now that's pretty much acceptable by an awful lot of people, even on the right wing landscape. But anyway, here's the National, echoes of Powell's, and a Scottish care sector boss draws comparison over Starmer's immigration speech, with one of the worst photoshoppings of going from Powell to Starmer that I've ever seen in my life. But hey, we've got to make sure that anyone going against any sort of immigration whatsoever is seen as literally Britain's Hitler, even though Enoch Powell literally lied about his nationality to fight the Nazis as soon as he could. Next up, you had virtue signalling from various left-wingers, John McDonnell, the old shadow chancellor of the Exchequer and self-avowed Marxist, saying he's the grandson of an Irish migrant. So am I don't care. Living in one of the most diverse communities in the country, we get along together pretty well, with every section of the community making its contribution. Talk of an island of strangers shockingly echoes Enoch Powell. It's all they can say. This is Enoch Powell, literally Hitler. It's getting ridiculous. It was jumping the shark years ago, but we're getting to a point clearly where crying Enoch Powell doesn't work anymore, and I've been waiting for that for years. Michael Rosen, a poet who's known for the nice, also wanted to say that his father was an immigrant, became an English teacher, and lived his whole life on the island, and he's asking, was he part of the island of strangers? And it's such a misnomer. You know, even the Homeland Party has activists in it who married foreigners. There is basically nobody who wants the island to be nothing but the indigenous. I don't think anybody wants that. Even the most hardline ethno-nationalists give the game away too much, because it's obviously unrealistic. But, you know, was everybody like Michael Rosen's father, who came over and taught English and was generally seen as a boon to the community and the country? No, obviously not. We have a whole host of foreign criminals that we still can't deport because of the ECHR. We have shed loads of illegal migrants as well. Just those two examples alone show that clearly there needs to be some control on this. And then, even when it comes to legal migration, there's problems that have been brewing there. You know, Hare Hills last year, big riot in a community in Leeds, and that it was not caused by natives or British nationals. It was large communities of immigrants, I'm afraid. Yeah, you know, the summer of love, if you want to call it that. The natives, the British nationals, they can cause riots too. No doubt about that. But this implication that, just assume the best out of every immigrant. No, people aren't doing that anymore, and this isn't flying. But well done for not bringing up Enoch Powell. Anyway, while the Tory party was trying to put out official statements effectively saying don't trust Keir Starmer, he will throw the borders open and not deal with the immigration problems, obviously the undercurrent of everyone's thought process on that is, hang on a minute, isn't this a problem that you made? But potential Tory candidate at the last election for Tunbridge Wells, who then was not selected as a candidate, pulled out of his candidacy because he said he didn't like living in Tunbridge Wells, Ian Dale, well, this is his clip from LBC yesterday.
I can't believe what I heard. It was a speech that, frankly, Nigel Farage could have given. It's a speech Suella Braverman could have given. It's a speech Robert Jenrick could have given.
Oh, interesting. So two people from the right wing of your party, plus Nigel Farage, who is slightly further to the right of those two people, they could have given that speech too. Yep, you're absolutely right, and they've pretty much said the same thing anyway. Yeah, I wonder why he's doing that, Mr. Dale. Why would he possibly be moving and pivoting right on these things? Is it because the right wing's correct on it? Possibly.
I could not believe I was listening to a Labour Prime Minister, making such what I thought were incendiary comments about immigration.
Oh, God, he's bottled it. He's completely bottled it. No, you're supposed to agree with this. You know, the vibes have shifted. You know, it's not 2015 anymore. You know, it's not incendiary to say, yeah, there are communities in Britain that effectively are foreign to, well, Britishers. You know, we're beyond that at this point. You know, people saw what happened in Hare Hills. And, you know, all rioting happens with native Brits as well. Yeah, I know. The thing is that typically native Brits do not have an entire riot over children being taken by the Child Protective Services because the mother left 4 of them alone and they gave the baby brain damage. You know, we don't riot over things like that.
Not once did he really mention any benefits from migration.
Well, that's because the benefits, largely these days, are not particularly seen. That is why. It's not to say there aren't any benefits, but, you know, 1 million came in a year. I would argue that most of them were not useful migrants.
And in one speech, to me, he lost all of the credit that he's built up for his handling of foreign policy. And then he starts talking about an island of strangers, therefore undermining all the careful community cohesion and good relations between our various communities that have built up over the past decades. In one stroke, he's managed to do that. I think it's an absolute disgrace.
Sorry, if you've been missing the news for the past few years, This is, sure, it's been successful in a fair few communities, but major news, it's clearly failed. You're behind the times at this point, and I want to mention again, Ian Dale, he was nearly selected as a Tory MP. There are still Tory MPs and Tory activists that are like this, that are still to the left of Starmer on immigration at this point. How have you not got the memo? You're a political commentator, for goodness sake. This is way in the past, the things you're talking about. It's over. It's done. And it's the reason I say again, don't trust the Tories on anything they're saying. You probably don't need me to tell you that, but there are still people like this prominent in the Tory party. It's ridiculous. Anyway, we'll finish up on someone who I do rarely cover on this channel because I just think he's an abhorrent man. But we'll cover a quick James O'Brien clip as well.
We might be quite royally screwed. Immigration could be zero. But if you go to hospital and have a bad experience, you're going to blame it on people who weren't born here.
What do you mean by that? I'm sorry, over the past 60 years at this point, obviously it's massively increased over the last few years, but if our hospitals were 100%, native-born Brit working in them, how would anyone blame immigrants on it? No, you can't pretend we live in this completely foreign world where Britain never had immigration. You can't pretend we live there and say people would blame immigrants there. No. The reason people blame immigrants is because pretty much weekly you'll get a story of how a language barrier caused what should have been quite simple healthcare issue to turn into something much more serious. People have died over language barriers in the healthcare service. You can't pretend all your political enemies are grugs who just don't like them simple as. No, there's real issues going on here, James. You can't just deflect like this anymore. It doesn't work.
Immigration could be zero, but if someone cuts you up in traffic and flicks you the bird afterwards and they, quotes, look a bit foreign, end quotes, you're going to blame immigration.
Well, how would someone who looks foreign get here if not for immigration? I'm not even sure what point he's trying to make anymore with these completely made-up anecdotes. Yeah, okay, native people make mistakes on the road and in hospitals. That doesn't then mean nothing is immigration's fault, if that's what you're trying to imply here. It's caused problems, quite clearly. And we're now at a point where it's completely undeniable and every major party is having to have an arms race to the right. Well, I say that, the two historically major parties are trying to catch up with reform.
If you like to wax lyrical about British culture being under threat, and what everybody knows you mean when you say that is that there are too many people around who don't look like you or sound like you.
No, we're talking about all the people saying British culture's racist. You have to stop doing X, Y or Z because it makes foreigners uncomfortable. Halal being absolutely everywhere now. I'm actually less bothered by that personally, but you do see it everywhere and it does bother people. It's seeing Turkish barbers absolutely everywhere while having people in there cutting hair that can't even speak the language. I've literally had that experience. It's having BBC Pidgin. Taxpayer money's gone into that. The examples are endless, and you can go back in my YouTube catalogue and find where British culture has been affected, either by immigration or, frankly, the left-wing hegemony. It doesn't really matter, they're one and the same to some degree. So you can keep trying to dismiss this, but fact of the matter is that Reform are getting into power, and you are, lucky for you, going to have an awful lot to complain about, but the country's going to get better, so you'll probably just be ignored.
Increasingly, that people don't think there's anything wrong or embarrassing about holding those opinions. But what are you going to do with all the people who are making you feel uncomfortable at the moment, even if the net migration figures come down to zero?
It's a good question, James. What are you going to do? Because everything you've tried for the past 20, 30 years, something like that, yeah, it's come to a head now. People have had enough. Your aims, the politics you wanted, you had it. And it's done. It's over. It's completely decimated. Trust me, the Greens are not winning Parliament on a ticket of pro-migration. It's not happening, but it's your only choice. And it won't get you anywhere, so, yeah, what you gonna do? You have failed to shame people for their opinions of, I quite liked the Britain of 30 or 40 years ago. You have not managed to shame people out of those opinions. Incredible. I wonder why.
Where are all the people currently making you feel uncomfortable? Where are they going to go?
Well, where are the immigrants going to go? I guess it's up to them. If they don't like it here anymore and, they want to go back to a place they would consider home, let's say, I don't really have much of a problem with helping them financially to achieve that. If they want to stay here and feel like they belong here, well, they can work for that as well. Given that that's already being made harder by Mr. or Sir Starmer, I should say, and would obviously be harder on a reform. You know, we've had indefinite leave to remain for an awful lot of people, and the reason that's being put back is for the Boris waivers to not be able to have indefinite leave to remain, because that would be ridiculous. But he doesn't have an answer for that either. He just thinks, well, they've been here for 5 years, I assume they've worked for us for 5 years. You know, give this cheap labour an extra award. You know, let them have access to benefits. I'm sure it will work out perfectly well. Oh, why is the PIP bill gone up to 100 billion? Can't think why that happened. If expats say are not welcome in Spain and they come from Britain, where do you think they go when Spain doesn't want them anymore? Where do you think they would move to, James?
And that's why I worry, and this is why I use the phrase, which I don't use often, royally screwed. I worry that the more you throw into the gaping maw of nativist unhappiness, the worse everything gets, not the better.
If you deal with nativists, which means British national unhappiness, if you do anything to make the British native interests happy, then things get worse. What are you talking about? All the British state should really care about is British nationals' interest. That is exactly what they should do. This is why I don't bother covering him much. He just says some of the most stupid things I've ever seen.
And you'd think, wouldn't you, that voting to reduce immigration in Brexit from a position of such epic ignorance that you ended up tripling it or doubling it would give people pause.
It's very funny how the leftists will always make the argument of, oh, Brexit caused more immigration, and that doesn't make them pro-Brexit. It's almost like they don't really care about immigration at all, and all they use the argument for is to call other people racist. Wow, incredible. I wonder why you kept losing the argument for so many years, and now we're at a point where the only party still on that side of things is the Greens. But I suppose there we go. People have gone nuts over this simple speech that, while there are echoes of Enoch Powell, sure, I can understand where that accusation comes from. In reality, not even Reform are quite at the point of the policies that were put forward in the Rivers of Blood speech. They're pretty much on board with the Race Relation Act thing. They want to get rid of the Equality Act, for example, which is kind of the modern-day Race Relation Act. But they're not stopping all inflows, and I don't think the appetite for stop all inflows is actually quite there, because of the problems that have been caused by mass immigration has meant you can't stop it overnight. However, they do have a hard cap of net zero migration, and not only that, they are also looking into, frankly, welfare chauvinism. So, you know, the 72% of Somalis who manage to get council homes in London, they'll look into that and get rid of it. Foreigners can't get council houses, they'll be making it slightly harder for them to get on benefits, things like that. Hiring foreigners is going to cost the company that hires foreigners a little bit more tax. You know, things like this. Things like this that will reduce the privilege of having an immigrant, being an immigrant in Britain, because there are absolutely privileges here. I don't really care what the left say anymore. It's quite clear at this point that their narrative is just completely broken. This is a massive vibe shift. It's huge. You'll have James O'Brien still complaining about this. You'll even have Ian Dale still complaining about this on LBC. BBC commentators complain about it. But realistically, GB News is the one pushing policy at the moment. And that is a world I didn't think we were going to get to until 2030. I mean, Clown Decade might not last as long as we think, fellas. It's going to be interesting, that's all I can say. But I think with that, it's everything I had for you for today. So if you want to help out the chat... no, I'll do shilling first. Tonight, I will be having a massive go with a panel about the right-wing Farage derangement syndrome. I touched upon it in this video, people saying, oh, you know, Labour and Tories are moving to the right of reform. Nigel Farage is actually damaging to the right. Just all this nonsense in the same week where everyone is having to play catch-up with Farage. You know, he's shifted the Overton window, etc. We'll go into it tonight. I have a lot to say, and no doubt the panel will be trying to say to me, all right, let's calm down a bit, you know, maybe it's not that bad. But I'm going to make my case. Thursday it's more Subnautica, so do come along to that gaming stream, and Saturday it's Laughing at the Guardian with some whamming. I do have the guests all sorted and lined up. It should be a good one, so do come along to that. Videos out as and when I can make them. Right, if you want to help out the channel, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Also do become a channel member or leave super chats, super thanks. All great ways to help the channel. and I really do appreciate absolutely everybody who donates. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.